So Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Good morning. When I was growing up, you're going to miss the best part. No, it's okay. Yeah. Had I known, I would have walked out on her Haftorah. I'm kidding. I would never have done that. I would have made faces, though. Just to follow up on that initial comment, nobody kissed me again this time around. I'm beginning to get the point. In any case, when I was growing up, watching television, there sometimes came across the screen an announcement that alerted us to the emergency broadcast system. I don't know if any of you remember that. Anybody? It was that high-pitched noise with a voiceover that was explaining what was going on. We interrupt this regularly scheduled program to conduct a test of the emergency broadcast system. You remember that? This was a test. It was only a test. In the event of a real emergency, you would be directed to the proper station for the necessary information. When I was growing up, that was a fear of nuclear war. I remember it distinctly because we had drills when I was in school that in the event of a nuclear bomb, you would hide under your little wooden desk. You think that's funny? Yeah, we didn't. We thought it would protect us. Today, unfortunately, the threats are more insidious. The threats are more wide in scope, far more vast. And the truth is, there is so much that tests us today. But I'll be honest with you, nothing has tested me in the rabbinate more than this past year. So here's where I need to step back and explain for just a minute. The moment religious school ends, I start working on the high holidays. I begin to assemble topics and material and begin to make choices about what material I have collected will become full-blown sermons and what material I've collected will become just interjections during the service. This morning, I've chosen to workshop a specific topic for the high holidays. So if you're a member of the congregation, you come on the high holidays, you may hear bits and pieces of this sermon all over again, but maybe a little more clear in its offering. Maybe the sermon will be more refined and reframed, rewritten, and edited for the high holidays. But since October 7th, I've probably given close to 30 sermons on the topic of what has happened in Israel, the world, the Jewish community in the subsequent days. I've spoken personally, and I have tried as best I can as a faith leader to offer some insight and direction. I've attended vigils and community gatherings. I've protested and stood in solidarity. I've written to political leaders and supported critical organizations that have provided both aid and advocacy. I've worn pins and necklaces and bracelets. There have been times where I have been glued to the TV and times I've had to turn it off. I have volunteered to pick fruit in kibbutzim that were decimated by massacre. I've listened, and I've listened, and I've listened, and I've tried to explain to people of all ages, from the very youngest of our community to the most mature. I've tried to explain what's going on and how we got to this moment, translating for our youngest and providing vocabulary for our oldest. And then I've listened, and I've listened, and I've listened, and at times I've lost all hope. And at times I felt completely defiant. I've always felt sympathetic for every victim and angry at all leadership, both here and abroad. Sometimes I've latched onto phrases like, "we'll dance again." And sometimes I just fake the joy. At times I have felt powerful and proud, despite world opinion. And at times I've been wholly disappointed. Never disconnected, but always I have felt in the past year impotent. And each week, a word or a verse from the Torah has yelled out some insight to me, some piece of wisdom, some piece of hope, a message of direction. And of course, this week is no different. But even in my position, I feel completely impotent. See, this morning's Torah has this great statement that Ruby pointed out. Ukratem b'deror b'chol haaretz u'b'chol yoshveha. Proclaim liberty throughout the land, which means let all people be free. And you can't help but hear those words and wonder about the hostages in Gaza. But it wasn't that word or that phrase that spoke most deeply to me this week. It was the words, V'chi tomru ma nochal b'shana hashvi'it hein v'lo nizra v'lo ne'asaf et tu'atenu. Jewish people are commanded at that moment in the Torah to let all the land lie fallow. Don't touch the land. Every 7 years, you got to give the land a rest. And the Jewish people ask the incredible question, Ma nochal b'shana hashvi'it? So if we do that, then what are we going to have to eat? You see, if we're not constantly working towards it, I guess we'll starve and go hungry. And so the Jewish people ask the simple question, what's going to be? It's the question that I'm asked most often as a rabbi. What's going to be? This week when 3 more hostages were found not alive, I was asked time and time again, so is this how it's going to be? Is this how it's going to end? Is it just going to end by trickles? Is there not going to be a moment, a decisive moment with conclusion? What's going to be? God's response to that is simple. Just look backwards. See, the past is a good indicator of the future. He says, "V'tziveti et birchati lachem b'shana shishit v'asat tefuah l'shalosh hashanim." Watch what happens, God says, in the 6th year. You'll see how much bounty there will be in the 6th year that it will carry you forward. It will be enough to carry you for the 7th year. As if to suggest in our lives we can bank enough happy moments so that in the future when life is difficult, we'll have something to draw on. God, how I wish that was true. God, how I wish every one of these moments in which we celebrate people like Ruby were enough to sustain us going forward. And honestly, watching how Ruby did this morning, it does propel you. It does inspire you. It does bring incredibly sincere joy to us. In a series of random laws that we're supposed to observe once we land in the land of Israel, once we live there, once we inhabit the land, God tells us there are going to be good times and there are going to be difficult times. There are going to be moments in which there is bounty, and there are going to be moments in which joy is scarce. The Torah prescribes for us in this morning's Parashat how you build a perfect society from scratch according to divinely inspired rules. The Torah says we need to understand the partnership that we have with God. But honestly, I have spent the last 232 days imploring every one of us to do everything that we possibly can, and I have not once called on God to do the same. And truthfully, I'm angry. How many times in the Torah has it said to us, if you keep up your side of the partnership, God says God will keep God's side of the partnership. If you take care of the land, God will take care of us. If we ethically cultivate the land, then God will make sure the land is capable of taking care of us. It is the same if-then proposition we have seen so many other times in the Torah. It's part of the covenant made manifest through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's affirmed by Moses and Joshua, and then King David, and then on to today. And it has become hard. And we are being tested. When the Jewish people ask, Ma tomru ma nochal, when they ask, what are we going to eat? They're asking the question that we have been asking since we were born and since the birth of the modern state of Israel. They're asking, how are we going to survive? When faced with existential threats to our lives, we all ask the question, how are we going to survive? Look, I wasn't alive during the Holocaust. It just wasn't. I wasn't alive when the state of Israel was born. I'm that young. But I have witnessed firsthand the insidious cruelty and barbarism 232 days ago. I wrote this sermon, you should know, on the 228th day. And I had to do the math on Tuesday of what would today be. Because I realized on Tuesday that I was beginning to lose hope that this would ever end. The worst part of this war is how hard it is to keep hopeful. To think about the families who are suffering. What's happened to the women, to the children. Every day, my faith is tested more and more. I hear the words, this is a test, only a test. And I say to myself, maybe the test is too hard to endure. This is the whole thing. Or rather, this is the whole in the whole thing. It's hard to hold on to a system where either God doesn't exist or God doesn't care. And I'm struggling. For 30 years, when faced with tragedy, either in my own personal life or in the life of our community, I have said to everybody, lean into your Judaism. When life got hard for me personally because of the challenges of my own personal life, I leaned in. I prayed more and I prayed harder. I studied more and I studied harder. And each time that's happened in the last 30 years to a community, whether it was Pittsburgh or 9/11, I said to myself and to our community, pray harder, study harder, give more graciously, give more generously. And it has worked. I've preached that God is crying alongside us. But I'm tired. So many nights I have tricked myself into believing that tomorrow the nightmare will end. And that we'll all be able to then go back to sleeping better, knowing the hostages are home safely. I've tricked myself into believing that just so that I could fall asleep. So many nights, though, it has been impossible to find relief. I have done what Abraham, Joshua, Heschel instructed in the face of crisis of faith, Take, he says, a leap of action. When it's hard to believe, just do something. I've said to people all the time, when life is hard, do something good for someone else. You'll feel better. And it's true, it works. In late October 1938, while living in a rented room in the home of a Jewish family in Frankfurt, Heschel was arrested by the Gestapo and deported to Poland. 6 weeks before the German invasion of Poland, Heschel fled for London. In short, Heschel was at the front row. He had a front row seat to the horrors and desperation of the Holocaust. And he said to God, if in our desperation we stray from you, draw us closer to you. Rabbi Erwin Kula, a unique voice in our world who was running an incredible organization at the time about innovative Jewish thought and programming at the time of 9/11, had a moment of crisis of faith. And he offered a different version of the same. He said the following: I had no idea who initially did it, but that didn't even come to mind. Within 15 to 20 minutes, the TV commentator blamed Islam. We all want to blame somebody. We all want to tell that it's somebody else's fault. Somehow religion has led us astray. And Kula asked the question, so what's become of religion? So I say to you today simply a message that it's hard. And in this moment, it's hard to believe. So in the face of the challenge to our belief system, I say, believe in each other. This isn't a sermon about God. This is a sermon about us. Today, I look out and see the faces of people who have given rides to people who need rides to the synagogue and to their hospital visits or to their doctor's offices. Today, I look out and see people who have brought food to people in need, to the homeless on the streets of New York. I see people who have given kindness and generosity and love and compassion. So I say what I've always said. In the face of a crisis of faith, lean in, or at least today, if you can't lean in, lean over and feel the warmth of the shoulder sitting next to you. Feel the warmth of the person sitting next to you. Because if we can't believe right now, at least we can help each other by holding tight. Shabbat Shalom.